Today, we welcome Margaret Kimberley, author, activist, podcaster, journalist. She has spoken in front of the UN and even a Veterans for Peace convention. There is so much to talk about, including the trade war Trump has just started with our neighbors to the north and south. But I think we have to start, if it's okay with you, Margaret, and can I call you Margaret?
Yes, sure. Go ahead.
Oh, please. Okay. I think we have to start with Trump, the recent plane crash, DEI, militarism, and austerity, and how they all link together.
Well, thank you first. Thank you so much for having me here. Vets for Peace is one of my, dare I say, favorite organizations. So it's a pleasure to join you. Well, it's a funny thing. I was telling one of my siblings. I said, Trump has been president not even 2 weeks. It feels like a year already. So let's talk about this plane crash, this terrible tragedy in Washington, which can be, it's one of those things that does not get enough attention, not considered a quote unquote sexy story. But the Federal Aviation Administration, it seems, is run on a shoestring. They rely on airline fees to fund the work of the agency instead of Congress appropriating what they should appropriate. So there's a shortage of air traffic controllers. And a very preliminary report has said there should have been two controllers in the tower, excuse me, that the night of the accident when the military helicopter hit
Mhm.
the passenger jet. There should be one person looking at helicopters, another looking at planes, and there was one person looking at both. There were some, it seems, unlike the president, I don't feel I should be giving a definitive reason, but it seems that there were unclear or insufficiently specific instructions given to the helicopter. Instead of just
Mhm.
saying, "Do you see the plane?" It's probably probable that the helicopter crew saw another plane and not the plane that they hit. Um, but immediately, Trump, being Trump, he blames Joe Biden. He blames DEI, diversity, equity, and inclusion programs. And I have to say, as a Black person, it's a difficult subject because DEI programs are a scam, basically. DEI became big in 2020 after the protests that took place nationwide after George Floyd was killed by police. And CEOs and government agencies suddenly claimed DEI, the diversity, was going to be important to them. Now, what it ended up being, of course, was virtue signaling by liberals. And there was even a study that showed that the diversity officers at most corporations were mostly white.
Mhm.
Black people were only 4% of those roles, I believe, and made less than other people. So I find it kind of funny that people on the right want to blame DEI for everything, and most Black people know quite well that it didn't do very much at all. However, it's being used to spread hatred. Excuse me, the people who speak in opposition to it most vociferously are racist. That's their reason for opposing these programs that do something for some people involved in them, but don't change the nature of the country, don't
Mhm.
make it less racist, don't give Black people more opportunity, none of the things that ought to be done in a society that's seeking real democracy and justice. But, of course, Trump seizes on this, that DEI kept qualified air traffic controllers off the job. But we also know in Washington, of course, it's the nation's capital, there are military helicopters. I had no idea. I mean, I've decided when I generally take Amtrak, I'm in New York City. I generally take Amtrak to Washington, and I'm going to keep doing that, by the way. Um,
Mhm.
that lawmakers, members of Congress are pushing to have more flights to go to their districts. The military are pushing to have flights. So you had an accident waiting to happen. And it's a huge shock because it's more than 15 years since there were any fatalities in a commercial flight in the United States. So it's shaken all of us up who fly. You know, I now realize flying is an act of faith and some degree of denial, and it's shaken up when something like this happens. So, what a president should say is, we don't know yet. Something simple like that. We are going to be on this. The National Transportation Safety Board is going to thoroughly investigate. We realize how important this is. That's all a president should say, but we're talking about Trump. So he issues an executive order saying DEI caused the crash. He has no authority to say what the cause of a crash is. So we have this bad combination, first of all, of austerity that is bipartisan, and it goes on administration after administration, with the government paying for less and less, not paying for, like the FAA, a governmental agency, Federal Aviation Administration. It should be fully funded. There should be no question about having enough air traffic controllers, but that's not the case because we have a system that's dedicated to the interests of corporations, dedicated to corporations, to wealthy people, to the military industrial complex, and not to the people of this country. So it seems to me that they were just lucky, and it's always bad when you get away with something you shouldn't be doing, because there's always a day of reckoning, and this was it. But we have dishonesty. We have Trump being Trump. We have members of Congress being silent as Trump is unilaterally making decisions about the budget, and members of Congress not speaking up for themselves, abdicating their responsibility. The military sharing airspace with civilian aircraft, and no matter how much austerity there's never a cut to the defense budget. We should call it the war budget. It was called the War Department, was it not? And then they changed
right.
it
War Department,
to Defense Department, but that is what it is. And no matter who's in office, that budget goes up and up and up. It's now about half of discretionary spending. So it's a confluence of a lot of things that need to change in this country that caused that accident.
My dad was in the FAA. He had a career, 38 years. He was an air traffic controller for many of those years. And for his last 12 years, he was FAA liaison to the Oceana Naval Air Station in Norfolk. And his responsibility was airspace, to make sure that military and civilian airspace were kept separate. And, he did a good job, but whoever had that job the other day didn't do a good job. And the other thing is the FAA, used to really be something that was feared if you screwed up. And the airlines, had to be, the FAA would investigate them and see what they were doing. Look at Boeing. I live in Charleston, South Carolina. We have a big Boeing plant. They make the Dreamliners, but they know that there are so many problems with them that they make someone fly them out to, where it is up near Seattle, where the other to take all the bugs out that they've already, got in. Of course, the one in Charleston is not union, so that probably has something to do with it. But the FAA now does not do anything corrective to the airlines. They have somebody in the airline, an employee of the airline, gets to do all the troubleshooting, and they say they tell the FAA what they're going to do.
Yeah, and I think it's fair to say this all started with Jimmy Carter and Reagan deregulating the airline industry. So that's one way to impose austerity, is for the government to step away from its responsibilities. But there's some things only government should be doing, as we are about to find out. I think a lot of people are going to find out the hard way. If you have this weird situation of Elon Musk, who's a private, who's not in the administration, not a government employee, deciding, and the president going along with what money is going to be spent on. And DEI, this DEI mania, people losing their jobs. I suspect a lot of the people who've been fired in the now almost 2 weeks that Trump came into office, I'm sure they're going to sue. They may get their jobs back. They may get back pay, but that can be a long-term effort. They do not have the legal right. This idea that Elon Musk can send government federal employees an email and say you can voluntarily resign, implying that you're going to be laid off, which probably is not legal. But it just shows you the power. We're seeing naked power of a billionaire, the richest man in the world, acting in concert with a president with a terrible agenda and weak politics. The Democrats are supposed to be in opposition, but I saw, Chuck Schumer, my senator, who was the Senate minority leader, he was on social media saying these tariffs, Trump's tariffs, are going to raise the price of food. Your Super Bowl meal is going to cost more. I mean, I could not believe he had. I don't know if it was an intern, if it was his fault, but that's all you have to say. You don't have a bully pulpit. You have play no role in democracy. And there's something else we need to watch out for. When Obama was president and when Biden was president, we were told if you don't have 60 senators, you don't really have a majority. If you have more than 50 but not 60, it's not really a majority. There's a filibuster. You can't necessarily do what you want. Well, Trump doesn't have 60 senators. There are, I think it's 54 or 55 Republicans in the Senate right now. Let's see if Democrats step up and stop him the way Republicans stop Democrats. I don't think that's going to happen, but people need to remember this, that, when you were told you can't talk about Obama, he doesn't really have a majority. Let's see what they do with Trump.
So what are your odds that the Democrats are going to...
I won't take that bet. It's a sucker bet, I think.
That's right.
Maybe the parliamentarian will rein him in.
The parliamentarian. I never heard about a parliamentarian my entire life, as much as during the Biden administration. All the things he said, well, the parliamentarian says we can't include a minimum wage increase and Build Back Better, which didn't happen anyway, which is one of the reasons Kamala Harris lost. But that's a problem with our duopoly. They're beholden to interests that aren't the interests of the people.
So, Margaret, you're the executive editor of the Black Agenda Report, and you're also got a Black Agenda Report podcast. And I've looked at a variety of subjects, and you are really all over the place. International, domestic. It's really a joy, and people can go to blackagendareport.com. .com. All right, and find all of your resources there. But and there's so much we can talk about, but Veterans for Peace is primarily, we do have a program, Peace at Home, Peace Abroad, where we try to bring these things together, and we do stand for peace and justice at home. But right now, what do you think, if I can turn internationally, what do you think about the ceasefire in Gaza? Netanyahu seemed to be turning, stop in Gaza, turn to the West Bank. But, what's your perspective there?
Well, my perspective is that all of the crimes, and they are war crimes, that Israel has committed since well, actually before October 7th, but let's just start with October 7th, 2023, when Israel killed many of its own people. This is something that has not been given enough attention. The Hamas attack, these are lightly armed people. We're supposed to believe that all those cars, the images we've seen of the cars burned up in the huge hundreds of cars, that these people with light arms are the ones who did this. Israel killed their own people. Now, some people say it was the Hannibal Directive and they have a policy of killing people in case they're captured, or it could be friendly fire. I can't speak to their motivation, but I want people to know we keep hearing about the 1,300 people. Most of them were killed by their own country. That's the first thing. And then immediately, Israel goes on this killing spree in Gaza, which it could not have done without Joe Biden. Joe Biden ran over there and kissed Netanyahu's ring. He even lied. Immediately, we heard about Israel bombing a hospital, and Biden said, well, we know it wasn't you. We know it was the other people. Now, that was just a blatant lie. So we've had hospitals bombed, universities bombed, every home bombed. Then they bombed people who lost their homes in who living in tents and refugee camps. And the estimate of deaths is about 200,000. People keep repeating this 45,000 number, but that's from the first few months. This went on for more than a year. It's about 200,000 people, and none of it could have happened without the U.S. We had a weak president who, lives in the past, Biden, who was not well, which is one of the reasons Kamala Harris lost. For 4 years, they told us he just has a stutter. When people noticed a decline, we're not crazy. We noticed he had these very weird outbursts and rages and confusion about where he was and couldn't even read from a teleprompter. And just your common sense, we've seen it. Everyone has seen people in decline in their later years, and that was Joe Biden. So we had a weak president, all that to say. We had people like Antony Blinken, the Secretary of State, and the National Security Advisor, Jake Sullivan, who were maniacal is the word in their support of Israel. We have a weak international system, the ICJ, the World Court, International Court of Justice, the ICC, the International Criminal Court. The ICC had to be dragged kicking and screaming to finally issue an arrest warrant for Benjamin Netanyahu. The ICJ, it's more than a year now since South Africa charged Israel with committing war crimes and genocide. And before I go any further, genocide is defined. There's a convention. I believe it's not from 1948. The Convention on the Prevention and Punishment of the Crime of Genocide, and it spells out very clearly what acts are genocide. Basically, it's targeting a group of people with harm. It could be physical harm. It could be mental harm. It doesn't even have to be killing. It's very, very clear that Israel's actions constituted genocide. And that it's a war crime to bomb a hospital. Now, Israel always said Hamas was everywhere. Well, Hamas was in the nursery school we bombed. Hamas was in the hospital. What's that?
800 mosques that they've destroyed.
Yes. Nothing left standing. I remember seeing footage of Israelis saying they had a tunnel. It was always about Hamas tunnels. They had a tunnel in a hospital. And I'm looking at that and I'm like, that's just a hallway. What tunnel? It's a hallway in a hospital. Of course they have hallways. It was, but the U.S. gave Israel impunity, protected Israel at the United Nations, at all these international bodies. But the blood of all those people is on the hands of the United States, and not just Biden. As far as I'm concerned, Biden, they should issue an arrest warrant for him from the ICC. But it was the Biden administration. It was Congress, and it was bipartisan support for Israel. So finally, and this, the ceasefire they finally agreed to, as imperfect as it was, had been on the table for more than a year. And it's Trump. I hate to give Trump credit for anything, but he's the one who came in and he had one of his people tell Netanyahu, you're going to agree to this after more than a year.
Yeah.
And so he did. Now, Israel, of course, now they're occupying the West Bank, which is illegally occupied anyway, doing the same thing, killing civilians. They even tear up olive trees, tear up crops to make certain that Palestinians can't try to keep them from surviving at all. Children being shot, people used as human shields, all sorts of horrific acts. But
American citizens being shot.
oh yes, but if it's Israel that shoots you, well, too bad.
Yeah.
And so Israel goes from, one crime to the next. And, the people I know and respect say we should be glad that this ceasefire agreement came to be. The suffering of the people of Gaza is a lot less, still not perfect, and we don't know what Trump is going to do. He said a couple of days ago that Jordan and Egypt could take in the people of Gaza. Jordan and Egypt have been asked before, and they've said no. They're still saying no. It does not benefit them to take in more than 1 million people each, who will radicalize their populations. These are both U.S. client states, by the way, but they don't want hundreds of thousands of displaced Palestinians in their countries. So, so we see the Trump of old saying, I'll be more pro. And he's already invited Netanyahu to visit. He's the first, what a surprise, first foreign leader for him to invite to this country. So but as long as the U.S. props up Israel, I'm afraid that Palestinian people are going to suffer. And the U.S. is an accessory to these crimes.
Well, with all that, let's turn to Ukraine. What do you think is going to happen there? What's your perspective there?
I don't know, because it was Republicans who said they wanted to end funding for Ukraine. And by the way, it's not just weapons the U.S. pays for in Ukraine. The U.S. is supporting the entire Ukrainian state. Everything a government does in Ukraine, they could not do without U.S. money. So when we say Ukraine, let's be clear about what we mean. But Republicans had said they wanted the funding to stop. But it was last spring in 2024 who stepped in and got the deal done and got the Republican House Speaker to go along with the funding again. It was Trump. So, some Republicans resisted briefly, but they all gave in. So Trump says I can end this war in a day, just a couple of phone calls. It's all nonsense. Of course he can't. But you don't know what he wants. But Ukraine is... it's a tragedy that's been going on for 30 years, since the fall of the Soviet Union, and the collective West got all of the former Soviet satellite states. All the Eastern European countries are now EU members, NATO members.
Right.
And they tried to pull Ukraine in as well. And this was a red line for the Russians, who've been putting up for this little by little for the past 30 years. Putin, when they called it a special military operation, sending troops into Ukraine, they were baited into it. They were in a tough spot. Ukraine was shelling the Donbass, the region of Ukraine that did not go along with this government. The U.S. had an actual coup. The U.S. was part of it in 2014. There were agreements that were never adhered to, the Minsk Accords that were supposed to give autonomy to certain regions, Donbass region, freedom of language, so Russian speakers wouldn't lose their language rights. President Zelensky grew up speaking Russian, by the way. He didn't speak Ukrainian until he was an adult. How about that? But of course, the Biden was hoping to, as someone telling tales out of school, I think it was Austin, the defense secretary, who said, we want to weaken Russia. Well, they thought they were going to sanction Russia and have regime change or weaken the country. None of that happened. In fact, when they sanctioned Russian oil, oil prices went up everywhere. And so Biden was responsible for that part of the inflation. And then they had this stupid, what was it, Putin's price hike? Well, prices have gone up. It's all because of Putin. And even they realized how ridiculous that was. They dropped it fairly quickly. But the U.S., I can say it, more people should. The U.S. blew up the Nord Stream pipeline that took an inexpensive natural gas from Russia to European countries. But Biden's team blew it up. And now Germany is deindustrializing. European countries have they really undermine themselves being good little vassals of the U.S. And now Trump's beating up on them anyway. So that's the only funny part of it. But like Denmark, so he's demanding that Denmark turn over Greenland. Denmark did everything. The explosion of Nord Stream was in Danish waters. I think international waters, but closest to Denmark. And Denmark was supposed to investigate. And at the end of the day, they just shrugged their shoulders and said, well, it was sabotaged and blew up because they didn't. Everybody knows the U.S. did it. So part of me is not sympathetic to Denmark and other European countries. But where does Trump really stand? It's hard to say. He's unpredictable. Also, presidents don't get to do just what they want to do. Not just the deep state, but the ruling class, the military-industrial complex. They've gotten fat off the Ukraine war. Do they want that to end? So it should end. There should be an agreement, a security agreement that states fully, that goes back to the Minsk Accords that later European leaders admitted was a sham. Angela Merkel and others said, well, we just did it to give Ukraine time to rearm. We didn't really intend to stand by it. So that's what should happen. What Trump will do, I really don't know. It's so difficult to say.
Well, okay. So that takes care of Ukraine. Now, you mentioned Greenland, and Trump is also stirring the pot with Canada, Mexico, and he's threatened to take the Panama Canal by force. So I read today in a variety of newspapers that that Trudeau has initiated tariffs of his own. That the Mexican president, she will do that on her own. But after Trudeau came out and made a statement, the governor of Texas threatened Trudeau. I'm thinking, what in the world? Are we going to get the Texas Ranger on the northern border?
Probably. I mean, who knows? It's very odd. And Canada's another example of a country that did whatever the United States told it to do. So I'm less sympathetic to, even though I think this is wrong. I hope they've all learned a lesson about being quiet little U.S. puppets. Yeah, I remember the first time Trump was president, they told the Canadians to arrest what was her name? Meng Wanzhou, who was the CFO of Huawei. And after keeping her in I think house arrest in Vancouver for a year, the U.S. finally admitted that they didn't have a case at all. The Chinese, in retaliation, arrested 2 Canadians. I mean, that was an absolute mess. If the U.S. says they're going to decide who the president of Venezuela is, Trudeau went along. If the U.S. said, the Canadians even, what an embarrassment. They gave the floor to this Ukrainian in their parliament. They said he fought against the Russians in World War II. Well, hello. Any Ukrainian who fought against the Russians in the Soviet Union in World War II was on the side of Nazi Germany. And so now, Trump is making good on all the things he used to talk about. And the U.S., he even went changing the name of the Gulf of Mexico to the Gulf of America. And talk about vassals, Google Maps said they'll change it on their maps.
Yeah,
Why?
And awful.
It is. It's horrible. So they're going to be tariffs. He's going to have mass deportations, but other people can impose tariffs. Now, today, he's like, Americans were going to feel some pain. He didn't say anything about that when he was running. It was all about, we're going to win and win and win. You're going to get tired of winning. It's so much winning. Now it's like, not so much. You're going to be a loser too. Um, but it's going to be interesting to see. We have a Congress that has given up. His party, whether they want to do all the things he wants to do is not clear to me. The Democrats in alleged opposition have been silent, absolutely silent about these things we've been talking about. So he doesn't have any opposition. And this is where the people come in. This is not going to stop without popular mass protest, I believe. And that will be a good thing for the country. I'm just sorry that so many things are happening to prompt that sort of thing.
Well, we're listening to Margaret Kimberley of the Black Agenda Report. And so now I want to ask you about Tulsi Gabbard, because Tulsi hinted or told the senators that it was NATO expansion that caused the Russian invasion, and those senators almost lost their minds.
Well, I never trusted her, frankly. She had marketed herself as a peace candidate, former congresswoman, ran for president herself in 2020. She said all the right things about war and being opposed to wars. Then she did a 180, and then suddenly she was a big right winger. And I know people who say she was hoping to be Trump's running mate, actually. But so Trump owed her, and he nominated her for this position, national, what is it? National National Intelligence
Department.
Okay, thank you.
Director, National Intelligence.
All right, thank you. Thank you so much. So now she has a problem, because she did things that were the right thing to do. When we were told the U.S. had to destroy Syria, which it ended up doing with the coup recently, but anyway, she said, let's talk to President Assad. That was actually the right thing to do, the sensible thing to do. But now she has to backtrack because Assad is out because of a U.S. coup. Edward Snowden, she had defended him, the whistleblower who ended up being stuck in Russia. Who's still living in Russia, by the way. He blew the whistle when Obama was president, so it's been a while. But now she's backtracking. They're like, well, do you think and they kept asking her, is he a traitor? Do you think he's a traitor? It makes me sick that people don't know the meaning of the word treason. But anyway, she did not backtrack when she said he wasn't, but her nomination is, I don't know if it's in jeopardy or not. I think if Trump wants to keep her,
Democrats will vote her down if the Republicans don't.
Yeah, they will. But so she'll probably get it because everybody's scared of Trump. But this is what happened. I remember when she dropped out in 2020 because she sounded like the leftist, the peace candidate. And then she dropped out and said, I'm endorsing Joe Biden. And I knew then, I said, well, I was right. Not to trust Tulsi Gabbard, but we will see if her nomination goes forward or not.
Yeah, well, while we're at it, Kash Patel, any comments about that guy?
The nominee to be FBI director, I have to tell you, as a leftist, I don't care who runs the FBI. People are upset. Trump's firing FBI agents. I don't care. I mean, the FBI, what did the FBI do? Surveilled Martin Luther King, wrote him a letter telling him to kill himself, murdered Fred Hampton and Mark Clark, the COINTEL program, and let's not just make this past history, recent years, indicting, I'm sorry?
Malcolm X.
Malcolm X, there probably had a role there too in his assassination. But just a couple of years ago, the Uhuru movement, they
Yep.
were raided. They were accused of being Russian agents. They were acquitted of the most serious charge. Although with this, this charge of conspiracy, they were found guilty of conspiracy. Well, if you thought they were innocent, what were they conspiring to do wasn't clear. The judge quite sensibly sentenced them to probation and community service. But that's something that happened just recently. That's what the FBI does. I don't care who runs the FBI. I don't care if this Hedgeseth character, I don't care that he runs the Pentagon. What is I don't care whoever runs the Pentagon, whether smart or dumb, qualified or not, have a long resume or they don't have one, the end result is war all over the world. And leftists need to stop allowing ourselves to get involved in these dumb arguments about whether Hedgeseth is qualified or not, when the problem is the war spending in this and war action carried out by this country. So Kash Patel, I don't care if he runs the FBI. And now it's kind of funny. Trump wants to get rid of anybody who had anything to do with investigating January 6th, and he has fired wholesale any FBI agents involved in that investigation. And apparently it's something like half of all the agents. It's 6,000 people. There's something like 13,000 total, which I find kind of funny. I don't care if the FBI is out of business. I don't feel like they make me feel safe. But so I don't care if Kash Patel is running the FBI. It doesn't matter to me at all.
They haven't said anything about the FBI agents who encouraged these January 6th.
Well, there's that too. There's every group, every movement has to be aware of infiltration by the FBI. How many of them were within the Proud Boys or some other January 6th type group? I mean, that's something that'll probably never come out. But yeah, I don't care about Trump, who he appoints. It bothers me, though, that he is saying he has the right alone to determine the U.S. budget. That, Elon Musk says they'll cut it in half. Well, that means most of the services we rely on are not going to work. They're not going to work.
No.
But even worse than my prediction is the fact that Congress has abdicated its responsibility completely.
Mm-hmm. Exactly. When we were sharing emails setting this up, you said that you wanted to discuss war propaganda and use the example of the invisible North Koreans who were allegedly fighting in Ukraine for the Russians. I guess I should have brought that up when we were talking about Ukraine, but
that's okay.
Go for it.
Well, we have these lies, these crazy lies that are told about Ukraine, which was supposed to be easy. The sanctions were going to destroy Russia's economy. It was all going to be over quickly. Now 3 years almost have gone by. So a couple of months ago, there was this claim that North Koreans were fighting with Russia in Ukraine. And the number ranged from sometimes they said 3,000, sometimes they said 10,000, but nobody ever saw these Koreans. Now, there is footage. If you go on certain Telegram, as a great platform for this, everybody's got a cell phone. There are videos from Russian soldiers, from Ukrainian soldiers, from drones, and there's nothing showing any North Koreans. Now, if there are several thousand of them, you mean to tell me they wouldn't stick out in Ukraine and Western Russia? Nobody would say suddenly there's North Koreans here. So there are a couple of grainy photographs of some Asian people, but lest we forget, Russia spans Europe and Asia. So there are Asian people who are citizens of Russia. So
all those areas.
Yes. And there are people who say they were just photographs of Russians who happen to be Asian. Yeah. But then there would be the stories about, well, they captured a North Korean, but he killed himself. Well, they captured a North Korean, but he died. And now and the past couple of days are saying the North Koreans have left. And they said, well, they were suicide missions, and that's why you never saw them. It just wasn't true. They made it up and the corporate media repeated it. I did not recall seeing a New York Times or Washington Post or BBC or any networks saying, wait a minute, if there are North Koreans in Ukraine and in Russia, in the Kursk region, the latest place where the Ukrainians tried to strike the Russians without any success, wouldn't somebody have seen them? How can there be no films, no video footage, no photographs? It was made up and it's just repeated by the corporate media. And we see there were certain outlets that were given space at the Pentagon, the New York Times, NPR, a couple of others, and Trump kicked them out and he's putting in Breitbart and Fox News and somebody else, and the Huffington Post, who hadn't even been asked, which I think is really wild. But part of me says that's terrible. And then I'm like, you know what? They were too cozy. They work in collusion with the state. These corporate media entities work with the state. And they're too cozy. So I don't feel sorry for the New York Times. And I think the Washington Post also were kicked out of this most favored press status. Maybe they'll do the real work of journalism now. But that's just an example of the kind of lies that are spread by our state and that the corporate media help to spread.
Speaking of lies, all this saber rattling, starting with Biden, well, actually starting with Obama on the pivot to Asia. What's the point? I know they're probably trying to start a war, but what's your perspective on why?
Well, it's China. They cannot. China's economic prowess cannot be stopped. And if a country's an economic power, it's probably also going to be a military power, and it cannot be controlled. So you have, some people say China's the second biggest economy in the world after the U.S. Some say it's equal to the U.S. But this is a problem for a system that insists on having hegemony, on being in total control, and not allowing anybody else to challenge it economically. China's making friends all over the world. There was this really sad episode, sad and funny, the APEC, which is the Asia Pacific Economic Group. They had a summit every year in Peru, and China built a port for Peru. So Blinken says, we're sending you these diesel trains. It was like 3 or 4 choo-choo trains. I mean, it was sad, really. It was kind of funny. But there's no way for the U.S. to compete with China. We've heard this story this week about DeepSeek, this AI company that was created with a fraction of the money. We're being told, to be on top of AI, the U.S. has to give some company billions of dollars. And the Chinese were like, we did it with 5 million and it's better than yours. So in return, now the CIA, it seems, has attacked their sites with the denial of service attacks. But China, it's China. They want to end China's influence, and they can't do it. It's futile. They want to break up Russia from China. That's not going to happen. Russia and China need each other to help defend against the U.S. So, going back to the days of Henry Kissinger, when he first opened a dialogue with the People's Republic of China. That was the thing. Make sure they're never friends with the Soviet Union again. Split Russia from China. Now, thanks to American presidents, they're like this. They're, Xi Jinping says they're better than allies. I don't know it's better than an ally, but and so that's the other thing, too, that China and Russia are so close and work in concert together. We need a multipolar world. That's a good thing. Yeah. So everything you hear about China is almost all of it is absolute nonsense. Just straight out lies. But it's all this idea of, banning TikTok because it was a Chinese government company, which it never was, although they voted to ban it. Now it's back up, but now it's censoring. Because the real nail in the coffin for TikTok was Israel. And Zionist groups were quite open. that people were posting on, their own soldiers actually posted on TikTok all their atrocities. But anyway, um, so we had to do away with TikTok because TikTok has your information. They've all got our information. Are they any different from Google or, you know, Apple or anybody else who has my information? I don't. And if Xi Jinping, you know, has my address and phone number, I don't care. But so that was China, and China. I mean, some of it's just lunacy. I think it's Florida said Chinese nationals can't buy property and this nonsense about farmland. China's buying up the farmland. The biggest owner of farmland in this country is Bill Gates. I mean,
Really?
it was just nonsense. It was absolute nonsense. Some tiny fraction of 1% of farmland is owned by any Chinese national or Chinese interest. But it's also racism. The fact that this is not a white country, and yet is competing with, and which has surpassed the nations of the West in many ways. So that's what
Yeah.
these efforts at China hysteria, anti-China hysteria, are all about.
Well, you brought up TikTok, and a lot of the student movement last year and the year before were getting a lot of their information about Gaza and Palestine
Mhm,
from TikTok,
mhm,
which led to their protests.
mhm.
And now the government is really cracking down on, well, Biden's administration did a lot to crack down, but right now I don't hear much about protests, and Trump is going to take away student visas, and so where's the student movement?
Well, it's been hurt by this crackdown. I mean, we've had professors being fired, students suspended, people making lists like the old McCarthy era of students. If you were involved in a protest, you can't get a job. Certain law firms saying they won't interview anybody who was involved in these protests. Now you have Trump saying you can be deported if you were involved in a protest. No, you can't. You can be deported if you're not in the country legally. You can be deported. Any non-citizen can be deported if convicted of a crime. So if you're not convicted of a felony, I think to be exact. So if those things haven't happened, you can't be deported because of an opinion you have. I mean, this is something that people need to seriously stand in the way of happening. But you know, the country is only as strong as the people who are determined to do the right thing. So if immigration judges, I certainly hope they reject any efforts to have people deported because of opinions they held. Um, you know, and there are other things too that Trump just should not be able to do. But in the face of everybody being afraid of him and this fake opposition, nobody knows. So, you know, Trump again destroyed the refugee program. Refugees are different from asylum seekers and other immigrants. Um, these are people in countries like Congo or Syria or Afghanistan, someplace where there's war. People have to first live in refugee camps, then they're vetted, then there are charities across the country which help to settle them. The process takes a long time, but he did it before in his first term. He's done it again. People have been waiting for years. Some of them thought they were coming to the U.S. very soon, and they're not. And it's a terrible thing. Um, and so, you know, things like that. But these deep mass deportations, I have to say something. I want to remind people. Trump says he's going to send people who are deported and their countries won't take them back. He's going to have a detention center at Guantanamo. Do you know who already did that? Bill Clinton.
Oh, brother.
You know, and the Haitians, these were Haitian
Yeah.
people. So
Yeah.
this has happened before. Attacking Panama, that happened before. Bush 41, Grandpa Bush, he
They
attacked
did it.
Panama, killed several thousand people. I mean, it was quite horrible. So we would obviously oppose any effort that Trump has to, take the Panama Canal back because, Panama's given it to China. They are trying to reconstruct the canal. It needs a lot of work, and there's a Chinese company, but Panama has a right to work with China. But this is what happens if he gets away with it. As I said before, the ICC, the ICJ, the United Nations have given in to the United States and made it very easy for U.S. presidents to bend international law to their will. And they have stood by and done nothing about U.S. lawlessness in the past. And so Trump, in a way, is not deviating from what other presidents have done.
I would have to give the ICJ some credit. What they came out with in July, these were basically legal consequences that they outlined for the states, and we, according to that, no UN member state can legally send any aid or assistance to Israel for their activities in the occupied territories, period.
That's what should happen.
They have no way to enforce it. That's the
There's
problem.
no enforcement. And so, these entities are, if they're toothless, then the U.S. gets to do it at once.
Yeah. The other thing I was going to ask is, these student visas and deporting students, the universities are they're basically accessories to this by expelling them from the school, so they no longer have a student visa.
Yes, and they have been so cowardly. Billionaires give money to these, I hate the word elite, but the Ivy League and that ilk. They don't do it for no reason. They want a compliant managerial class for the ruling class. And they've put their foot down, and they have decided that. So, for example, here in New York, New York University says that even using the word Zionist, if you're being critical, can be considered improper speech for students. Palestine solidarity groups being decertified as being linked to the universities. I said before, professors losing their jobs, some students having been kicked out. Harvard just said they've accepted is it the IAHR? Am I getting the
right.
definition of anti-Semitism, which basically says if you criticize Israel, you're being an anti-Semite.
Yeah.
And so they've taken away their students and their staff, their professors' free speech rights. Yep. So it's been they really dropped the hammer, and this is all over the world. Last week, the journalist Ali Abunimah of Electronic Intifada was arrested and held in Zurich, Switzerland. He was invited to give a talk, and I believe he wasn't even charged with the crime. They just kept him in jail a couple of days, making sure he couldn't give his talk, and then deported him, put him back on a plane, and sent him back to the U.S. So this power of this group is just immense. And we see, I don't know of any other issue where the right to free speech has been damaged so much as in this case.
And all these people they're accusing of anti-Semitism, half of them are Jews.
Well, there's that too, but if you're not in lockstep with them, they'll beat up on some Jews too.
They do that in Israel too. They're really violent toward the anti-Zionist Jews there.
Oh, they absolutely are, and what are we always told? It's the only democracy in the Middle East. That's nonsense. It's not a democracy either. But
well,
anyway.
Margaret, we've covered so much, and I'm thinking, where do you get your information? What sources do you go to?
I'm online all day long. I just have to tell you, I'm a voracious consumer of information. You have to look at independent media. So you read the New York Times because you have to know what the establishment is saying, but you have to come to Black Agenda Report to get a different point of view, to go to their other sites. Consortium News, I'm on the advisory board. They do, obviously, I think, do good work. The Gray Zone, Black Alliance for Peace. I'm on the leadership of Black Alliance for Peace. We have great statements about things happening, political education for our members and for the public. Um, and by being sometimes our contributors to Black Agenda Report teach me things I didn't know. So we'll have an issue and I'll say, I didn't know that was going on. So everybody should read our site and listen to our podcast, which you can get on our site or on SoundCloud. We're on a couple of Pacifica stations, WBAI in New York, WPFW in Washington. But I'm on the X platform, despite the fact that Elon Musk is amplifying the most retrograde forces in the world. There is still an ability to find people, reliable voices who can speak to these issues in the world. But I think the most important thing to know is that you're not going to learn anything useful in corporate media. You're not. You're not going to hear it.
Mm-mm.
So you have to look outside.
Well, we've got about 6 or 7 minutes left, and Harvey and I have been kind of just leading the conversation as far as what we want you to talk about. What do you want to talk about?
Oh, well, we've covered quite a lot. I want to talk about what's going on in Congo right now. It's a terrible humanitarian crisis. And this is because of the U.S. Eastern Congo is mineral rich, gold, diamonds, coltan, cobalt. Everything the world needs to operate is in Congo. Nation of Rwanda, and Uganda are U.S. allies. And they regularly send troops in and plunder the Congo and deliver these minerals to the U.S. and to European nations. So Rwanda has seized so much territory. It's practically an annexation of Congo. I have a good interview with Maurice Carney of Friends of the Congo this week in Black Agenda Radio. So the U.S. is involved there. It's not just an issue of African warlords. It's not Africans can't manage their own affairs. It's the U.S. interfering and using proxies to help make sure that Congo stays destabilized so that its minerals can be extracted by the U.S. and Western nations and some Chinese corporations as well. And that is the cause. So they will pretend, they'll go through a charade of criticizing Rwanda, their president, Paul Kagame, but they don't mean it. They don't mean it at all. He is serving their interests and he's just fine with them. So we've done a lot of coverage of Congo. So I wanted to mention that as well.
And of course, that doesn't make the mainstream media.
No. They may tell you Congo's war torn, the X number of people are killed, and but not tell you why, not give you the history, not tell you about the U.S. involvement, and that's why independent. I don't use the term alternative media; it implies it's somehow less than. Independent media is so very important.
What about Al Jazeera?
They're iffy. I like some of their reporting, but they're allied with the government of, is it Qatar that they're so close to?
Yeah.
But so they have a political angle. Qatar is a friend of the U.S. though, and has been a part of this, this eventual ceasefire. Qatar played a role in bringing about Electronic Intifada is a good site. Palestine Chronicle, Ramzi Baroud on the issue of Palestine. Some of our friends who Margaret Popular Resistance.
Yes, Margaret Flowers.
Yes, who I just spoke to last week. She does great work as well. But yeah, there are a lot of sources, but you have to look. And so people are lied to about, non-existent Koreans in Ukraine. And the only people who are telling you it's not true are independent media. But you have to know who they are and make a real effort to look. And it's frightening to me, frankly, that it's so easy for lies to be spread and so hard to get information out to the public. That just shows a different point of view. You might read the outlets or listen to them that I mentioned and not agree with them, but at least you were able to see that there's a different point of view. Not the New York Times just backing up whatever a president does. And I want to mention also when the Trump administration tried to overthrow Maduro, the elected president of Venezuela, the New York Times was in lockstep. When Trump assassinated the Iranian general Soleimani, the New York Times was in lockstep. So I am not sympathetic that they got kicked out of their cushy little office in the Pentagon because they do not do their job as journalists.
I, it is February, and I do have to ask you, with Trump and his administration and his public affairs blondie coming out recently with every third word was woke, and I'm thinking, okay, do you think Black History Month is in danger with this administration?
Well, we celebrate Black History Month. If you're interested in Black History Month or any other history month, you can go ahead and celebrate it. Trump has said there will be no federal agencies can't celebrate Black History Month or Women's History Month or anybody else's month. It's all smeared with being DEI, this word woke, which has no meaning now. I feel like, what are you talking about? Wokeness, I mean, he actually put it in executive order. We're going to fight wokeness. I ended up on Trump's mailing list. I don't know what I did to deserve this, but these actual official proclamations saying we're going to fight wokeness in the military. I mean, come on. But but no, people who despite my last article was about the death of DEI, my last column in Black Agenda report. Just repeating what I said before, it's basically a scam. Doesn't do much except the people promoting. Who see DEI under every bed. It's ridiculous. They are motivated by racism, and they want to bring the mentality of Americans back to as a friend of mine said, back to the 19th century. And so any woman with the job or a Black person or Latino person, it's because they are DEI hire. And apparently only straight white men are the only competent people in the world. But yeah, but we're going to ignore that. And if you want to celebrate Black History Month, and I would say, I would hope, I don't want it just to be, did you know a Black person invented this or that? I mean, it's good to know that a Black man invented the traffic light, which just happens to be true. That's nice to know. But I think for Black people, it has to be about thinking about liberation. And for other people to see these weeks and months in that vein, that everyone has contributed to the world. And it's important to know what a group you haven't thought much about, the role they've played in society. So there may not be a Black History Month at the Pentagon or the FBI. I mean, it was ridiculous. Martin Luther King Day, the FBI actually, who played a role in killing him, the FBI celebrates King Day. So I don't care that they don't celebrate Black History Month or King Day, frankly. These should be people's holidays. And it's problematic when they become public events because they're co-opted by people we should not want to have any connection with.